Now, in the Catholic Church, here we see some more pyramids with all-seeing eye all over the place. Instead of the halos here, Jesus has, well, it looks like 3 Jesuses in a row. They all have pyramids above their heads with the all-seeing eye on the chest. Here we see the cross with the all-seeing eye. And we see Greek Orthodox monastery in Greece with the all-seeing eye. This is a Greek monastery with the all-seeing eye with the pyramid. Here we see the Catholic bishop priest with the PX sign, the Chi Rho sign, and he has his mitre hat, which is similar to the priest of Dagon with the all-seeing eye. Again, with the PX sign, Wiz Khalifa seen here with more symbolism on his clothes. I don't even know if he knows what all these symbols and signs mean, but maybe he thinks it's cool. He's wearing it. Other people know what it means. Now, the eye of the horse with the rays is, like I said, is in the Catholic Church. This was also used way back 2,000, 3,000 years ago, carved on these rocks. And the same symbols used for the Freemasonry, here we have the compass and the scale. These are all symbols that they used back in those days. Here we see in numbered the symbol of the sun, the compass, which the Freemasons used, the crescent moon and the star. We see number 4, the solar wheel, and the 3-layered mitre, and the cross of Horus, which, similar to the Knights of Malta, this was originally known as the cross of Horus, and the priest of Horus would wear this. And ironically, it's on the Pope's outfit. Ancient Baal worship, here we see the moon crescent was a form of Baal worship back in the day. And it was basically, giving praise to the solar deity of sun worship, Baal worship, or Baal Hadad, as depicted as a disc in a crescent. Also used coming from ancient Horus. These are all of them are the same. And as you see here, it's also used in the Catholic Church. The moon crescent with the sun over the bull was an image that the Jews made in gold at Sinai. The Babylonians used it in sun worship. Roman Catholic uses it as well. And the moon with the sun over it is also used in a symbol of the Islamic temple, and as well as Egyptian artifacts, as you can see here. So by showing this exact replica of the moon crescent, similar to Baal worship, the Roman Catholic monasteries, they're probably depicting an exact duplicate of the Babylonian worship of the sun god Baal. Is it ironic also that the Vatican and Jesuits, together with University of Arizona in 2010, announced this new high-powered telescope instrument named Lucifer? A lot of people were really upset why they had to name it Lucifer. And this was a joint project by the Vatican, Jesuits, and the University of Arizona, and they built it on Indian ground. But when you name something Lucifer, it kind of shows, or subliminally shows, the true colors of maybe the true master, because nobody's going to name their children Lucifer. I mean, nobody's going to say, well, what do you want to name our son? We're going to name him Lucifer. No, that's not what people do, and nobody wants to have a business associated with Lucifer, because we all know Lucifer is associated with Satan. But, according to popular science, the new telescope is supposed to help scientists see how stars are born, and some say it's also looking for evidence of the return of fallen angels, aliens, or Nephilim, whatever you want to call them, or the meteor wormwood that's supposed to come from heaven in tribulation times and hit the water and turn like most of the water's blood and kill all life, kill like a big portion of the life, fish life, or sea life during the last days, and also the Antichrist. But the name supposedly has an acronym which stands for the Large Binocular Telescope Near Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. And yes, according to popular science, is named for the devil, whose name itself means morning star. Here's a picture of it right here. A lot of people don't know that there's a company that used to be called Lucifer Trust, was changed to the name Lucis Trust, and is currently the publishing house which prints the United Nations material. It was established in 1922 as Lucifer Trust by Alice Bailey, one of those people that were along with Margaret Sanger and all this whole age of eugenics and all types of confusion. And Blavatsky and this Theosophical Society. But they changed the name to Lucis Trust because Lucifer Trust revealed the true nature of the New Age movement too clearly. You know, they wanted to conceal it a little bit better than that. That was just showing it hardcore out there in your face. Now, at one point, this Lucifer Trust office was based out of New York, and it was located at 666 United Nations Plaza. And it was a member of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations under a slick program called the World Goodwill. In an Alice Bailey book called Education for a New Age, she suggested that in the New Age, world citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened, with a world federation and a world brain. What is that supposed to mean? In other words, a one world government or a new world order. And Lucis Trust was sponsored by, amongst others, such as Robert McNamara, former Minister of Defense in the USA, President of the World Bank, and member of the Rockefeller Foundation, and Thomas Watson, the IBM former ambassador to Moscow. The Lucis Trust sponsored other organizations such as the UN and Greenpeace International, Greenpeace USA, and Amnesty International, and UNICEF. And this is a United Nations worker, named David Spangler, director of the Planetary Initiative, and he quoted this. He said, "No one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. So no one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation." Quoted by David Spangler. Now, you don't hear about this so much because the truth is kind of suppressed and kind of swept under the rug, and nobody hears about it. But this is real stuff. Anybody can look this up, research this. In 1976, Walter White Jr. He was supposedly a concerned patriot who conducted an interview with a young Jewish man named Harold Rosenthal. At the time, he was an assistant to Senator Jacob Javits of New York. These are real people, folks. In the interview, he later published it as The Hidden Tyranny. The arrogant Rosenthal, Jewish guy, boasted on tape that the Jewish people have fabricated certain falsehoods which work to conceal their nature and protect their status and power. And he also debunks the commonly accepted lie. He said that the Jews lie that they are Israelites and thus they are God's chosen people. Then this guy named Harold Wallace Rosenthal went along to say that most Jews do not like to admit it, but our God is Lucifer. So I wasn't lying, and we are his chosen people. Lucifer is very much alive. And this is a true quote said by Harold Wallace Rosenthal. Unfortunately, he supposedly was he died in some freak accident, which was labeled a murder. And he's no longer with us, but and the Bible says Lucifer's goal is to be like the Most High in Isaiah 14:14, and to usurp the worship of God, Matthew 4:9. So Lucifer's purpose is to deceive the whole world, Revelations 12:9, by transforming himself into an angel of light. This is in 2 Corinthians 11:4. And this is kind of best exemplified by the Freemasons, because their motto, making good men better, produces a far more favorable public image than the more accurate alternative. Hold on a second. So, we're talking again still about Judaism and the Jews. You can see here in the Israeli Supreme Court, occultism. You see that on top of the Supreme Court, you see the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. And this is at the Israeli Supreme Court. And at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll be a picture you'll see later of the grove of Dorothy de Rothschild. And the grove is basically a Washington monument, what we call a Washington monument, but nowadays it may be called an obelisk. And it's also in Vatican City. And Israeli Supreme Court was funded by the Rothschild family. And if you look at close-up pictures of the Israeli Supreme Court, you will see that this pyramid right here, as you can see from this chamber, and you can see the pyramid has at the top a hole inside of it for the all-seeing eye, kind of like symbol to be. And inside, a lot of people say that there's 30 steps to get up to a level chamber that has 3 levels. So you got 30 steps walking up to this chamber, kind of like a library that has 3 levels, all equating to 33. And in this chamber, if you look out the window, supposedly what you see is this big pyramid structure with the eye, a little hole cut out for the eye. Now, interesting enough, they found a stone pyramid in the 1980s in the jungles of Ecuador, along with other artifacts referred to as the Lamana artifacts. Now, the stone that they found was a pyramid, and the pyramid stone had 13 rolls, just like our dollar bill. And the stone was in black and white, and like I said, it had 13 levels on it. It was engraved into it, and there was also a little eye at the top that, when you shined it with UV light, it glowed like yellow orange. And this was found in Ecuador. It was found in Ecuador in the 1980s. And but the interesting part is what you find when you turn this pyramid upside down, stone. Now, the translation of the 5 symbols engraved on the base of the pyramid stone reads, "The Son of the Creator comes from here." So this language that they was able to interpret was so-called pre-Sanskrit, and it was translated by a German linguist, Kurt Schildermann. And according to him, the writing was very similar but older than Sanskrit. Sanskrit dating back to like what the ancient Sumerians wrote, and even some of the Dravidian Indians, their language is based off of ancient Sanskrit. Until Schildermann saw this and other artifacts, Sanskrit was considered to be the oldest written language. So that's why the reason why he named it pre-Sanskrit. And as you can see here on the bottom of the pyramid, you see the Orion constellation, and these little dots right here is in fashion in the Orion constellation. In Egyptian religion, Osiris and Horus came from the Orion constellation, and the Orion constellation was lined up with the pyramids of Egypt. And these other symbols right here were ancient pre-Sanskrit. And so he translated this Sanskrit writing, and he came up with 2 different types of translations. A German site translates the line as "the Son of my Creator moves or comes from outside into." And then the mirrored translation was "Venus mine is from highest creator star." Venus mine is from the highest creator star. And Venus was also always associated with Satan. So if Satan and his son, the Antichrist, are synonymous with the Egyptian gods Osiris and Horus, this would kind of explain why Satanists like Aleister Crowley and Antoine LaVey were obsessed with pyramids and triangles. Like I said, Satan is ironically also associated with the planet Venus. It's also said that the stone is also said to be possessed by the Rothschild family. So there were only like 3 stones found, and they were all identical. This one stone happened to be found in Ecuador, and supposedly the Rothschilds had in their possession the same exact stone, and then somewhere else it's in a museum. And and we see that this stone had the 13 rolls, just like our dollar bill, and it had the little all-seeing eye at the top. And as I was talking about earlier, that we have the 13 in the words Anuit Coeptus, and 13 letters in the saying E pluribus unum. That's at the top of the eagle on the right side of the dollar bill on the back. And you have the 13 illuminated stars, which supposedly make up the 13 colonies in America, but when you connect the dots, it forms a hexagram. And as you can see, the eagle is holding a branch with 13 leaves and 13 berries. And then on the other side, the eagle's holding up 13 arrows. And the date on the bottom of the pyramid in Roman numerals is 1766. But if you kind of intersect each one of these words, it equals 666. And if you connect the hexagram on this part right here, as you see here, it spells Mason. We're going to start talking about also going along with the knowing your enemy with Satan and how they're infiltrating everything. I'll talk about Aleister Crowley a little bit more. And here we see here, again, he has the saying, do what thou wilt shall be the whole law. And he has the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, a hat, and the hat is fashioned in the form of a pyramid. Jay-Z's wearing the same saying. Now, Aleister Crowley was born, Edward Alexander Crowley. He was an English occultist. He was a magician, poet, grandmaster Freemason, Rosicrucian, Jesuit, Satanist, bisexual, and mountaineer. He was responsible for founding the religion of Thelema. In his role as the founder of the Thelemite philosophy, he came to see himself as a prophet who was entrusted with informing humanity that it was entering the new eon of the Horus in the early 20th century. The Eye of Osiris, the Eye of Horus, and the Eye of Ra is commonly used today in Illuminati, Freemasonry, Rosicrucians, the Catholic Church, and Judaism, Kabbalism. Now he believed that the history of humanity was divided into a series of eons. The first eon we were in was the eon of Isis, and it supposedly occurred during prehistory, at which mankind saw worshiping a great goddess symbolized by the ancient Egyptian deity Isis. And in the age of Osiris was a period that took place during the classical and medieval culture centuries when humanity worshipped a singular male god symbolized by the Egyptian god Osiris. And then now, supposedly in the 20th century, he says that we entered into the age of Horus, which was controlled by the child god Horus, and that humanity will enter a time of self-realization and self-actualization. Remember, the serpent promised Adam and Eve that their eyes would be open if they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in the passage words, the eyes will be open, which in Hebrew can be translated to knowledge. So knowledge shall be broadened. You shall know what God did not want you to know. And that's what the fallen angels did. They taught mankind things that they were not supposed to know. The law of Thelema, this is a symbol of Aleister Crowley's religion, and it's basically almost like a knockoff of the Freemason symbol if you look at it, and also the hexagram at the same time. And also he has symbols where they're resembling churches with the oval, with the dove facing downward, with the all-seeing eye. And this dove facing downward is also seen in the TBN network and the symbol for the Rothschild family and the OTO society. Albert Pike was also another person. He was right along with Aleister Crowley, and he revealed that the solar motif was embodied in the triangle and the pyramid. It represented the trinity of masonry: the sun, Osiris, the moon, Isis, and the star, Horus. And with their union through the male Osiris and the female Isis, they produced the all-powerful deity Horus, who was yet another personification of Lucifer, Osiris. Albert Pike was very famous in the original Caucasian Freemasons. Albert Pike did not want to have any black people in the Freemasons. He said that if they were going to start to allow black people in the Freemasonry, he was going to leave and just like basically denounce Freemasonry. And they kind of listened to what he said because he was a Grandmaster Freemason, and thus then you had the Prince Hall Masons that were formed, the Prince Hall Black Freemasons, and for a long time the European Freemasons, white Freemasons, did not accept the black Freemasons. This is all because Albert Pike was racist. He also had something to do with the KKK foundation, founding father, and he didn't want black people in there. But of course, we eventually wanted to belong to something that the white man created, and so we got into Freemasonry. We started our own Freemasonry, and just in addition to Greek fraternities, we established our own Greek fraternities, and that's why we see these Greek fraternities, black Greek fraternities, but we see a more higher number of white fraternities, Greek fraternities, than black Greek fraternities. I'm showing you some more pictures of how the all-seeing eye is everywhere. It's in the church, it's in Nickelodeon. As you see this picture here in Nickelodeon, you see all these pyramids and eyes all throughout this commercial. So getting back to Aleister Crowley, in December 1896, and this is real interesting, Crowley had his first significant mystical experience, of which he would later claim that this was when the philosophy was born in him. His late biographer, Lawrence Sutin, believed that this was the result of Crowley's first homosexual experience, which brought him an encounter with an eminent deity. Following this experience, Aleister Crowley began to read up on the subject of occultism and mysticism, and by the next year he had begun reading books by alchemists and magicians. In October, a brief illness had triggered his considerations of mortality and the futility of all human endeavor, or at least the futility of the diplomatic career that Crowley had previously considered. And instead, after this, he decided to devote his life to the occult. Now, in 1904, Aleister Crowley and his wife, Rose, traveled to Egypt on their honeymoon under the pseudonym of Prince and Princess Chioa Khan, titles Crowley claimed had been bestowed upon him by an Eastern potentate. Now, according to Crowley's own account, his wife, Rose, who was pregnant, began to experience visions while in Egypt, regularly informing him that they are waiting for you. She kept telling him they're waiting for you, but not providing him with any further information as to who they were. Aleister Crowley thought she was crazy. Like, who is they? Who is they? What are you talking about? We're in Egypt. You keep talking about who they are waiting for you. It was on March 18th, after Aleister Crowley sought the aid of the Egyptian god Thoth in a magical rite, that she actually revealed who they were. And she revealed that the ancient Egyptian god Horus, who we talked about with the left eye, and his alleged messenger. She then led him to a nearby museum in Cairo, Egypt, where she showed him who they were once again. So the parentheses, they, just like Michael Jackson says, they don't really care about us. They know who they are. But in Aleister Crowley's sense, his wife kept saying, they. But this time when she was in this museum in Cairo, Egypt, they were walking along, and there was an exhibit of a 7th century BCE, before Christ, mortuary stele known as the stele of Ankh-F-In-Khonsu. Later came to be revered in Thelema as the stele of revealing. Now, Crowley was astounded, for the exhibit's number was 666. So the exhibit, at the bottom of the number was exhibit 666. So every exhibit had a number. The number of the beast in Christian belief, and that the stele showed a picture of Horus sitting on the throne. Crowley saw the picture of the Egyptian god Horus sitting on the throne and took this to be a sign from a divine entity. And on March the 20th, 1904, he began performing ritual invocations of the god Horus in his rented room. This is a picture of the stele of revealing, and as you can see here is a picture of the god of Osiris, Horus. and all types of Egyptian symbolism. As you can see right here on the back of it is the exhibit number 666. Now, in 1904, April 8th, while the couple was still staying in Egypt, Crowley heard a disembodied voice talking to him, claiming that it was coming from a being known as Aiwass. And Aiwass said that he was the messenger of Horus, the true nature of whom Crowley never understood. So Crowley's disciple and later his secretary name was Israel Regardie believed that this voice came from Crowley's subconscious, but opinions among different Thelemites differ widely. Now, Aiwass, this entity claimed to be a messenger from the Egyptian god Horus, who was also referred to by him as Hor-Par-Krat. Crowley wrote down everything the voice told him over the course of the next 3 days and subsequently titled it the Book of Law. This person commanded him and explained that a new eon for mankind had begun, and that Aleister Crowley should serve as a prophet. As the supreme moral law declared to Crowley, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole law," the same thing that Jay-Z had understood, and that people shall learn to live in tune with their true will. In other words, do what you want and do what makes you happy. Satan wants man to do whatever he wants to, which is innately evil and of the flesh. So he uses sexual immorality, money, technology, and TV to take us into a state of wickedness and ungodliness. Now, Crowley later he visited his friend Elaine Simpson in Shanghai, and she was a fellow occultist who had been in the colleague of the Golden Dawn, which we talked about earlier, and she was fascinated by the Book of the Law and the prophetic message that it contained, something he had been ignoring, and together they performed a ritual to invoke Aiwass once more. The ritual was successful, and Aiwass provided Crowley with the message that he should return back to Egypt with the same surroundings. And he says then Aiwass said, "There I will give these signs." Nonetheless, Crowley ignored the advice of Aiwass and headed off to America. Here he has a picture of him in his book, "Do What Thou Wilt." Here he is again with the OTO Society and in the symbolisms with the hexagram and the pentagram of 666. And here we have two Washington monuments. The Washington Monument sits in our capital. We think it's the symbolism of freedom in America, but it's not. Here we see again Jay-Z 2 times wearing the same outfit. I don't think this is the same day, but he's wearing the same outfit, "Do What Thou Wilt," which just goes along with Satanism. Now, Aleister Crowley also was he was known to spend the night in the Pyramid of Giza when he was in Egypt, and not too many people spend the night. I think one other person was Napoleon. He spent the night in the Pyramids of Giza, and everybody that spent the night in the darkness in the Pyramids of Giza, when they got out the next morning, they were utterly shook up and disturbed. And usually the people that was around them would ask them what happened, and they wouldn't say anything because they said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." But when Aleister Crowley went into the Pyramids of Egypt, he went into a trance, and he started doing his little rituals and calling upon demonic forces, and an entity known as Lam came to him, and he drew a picture of this guy named Lam. And this was around 1918, and the picture that Aleister Crowley drew of Lam is similar to what a gray alien looks today that they show us on TV, with the big eyes, the big head, the slit mouth, and the nose and no ears. Basically similar to what a UFO alien would look like. And so Crowley included the portrait of Lam in his Dead Souls exhibition in Greenwich Village, New York in 1919. The same year is published as a front piece labeled "The Way" to Crowley's commentary to this lady named Helen Blavatsky's "The Voice of Silence." But beneath the picture was the following inscription. Lam, which is the character he drew a picture of, is the Tibetan word for way or path. And Lama is he who goeth, the specific title of the gods of Egypt, the treader of the path, and the Numerical Value 71. Now, interesting is that in Job 1, 6 verse 7, it talks about, the verse says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also with them. And the Lord said to Satan, Whence cometh thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So here, God tells Satan, like, what are you doing? Where you come from? Where are you coming from? And Satan says to the Lord, I'm coming from going up and down and to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Lam is the Tibetan word for the way or path, or he who goeth. Now, could Lam have been a part of satanic evil forces, or Satan appearing as a modern day large-headed alien that we see on TV every day? It's kind of interesting, because when you look at the alien autopsy in 1948, that a lot of people will say it's a hoax, but a lot of people that are into the costume industry of making costumes for like Star Wars and different things today said that back then there's no way they could have made a costume or a figure to go through and look the way that the alien autopsy looked, with the bleeding and the moisture in the skin when they cut this alien open on the table. And ironically, this alien on the autopsy table in 1948 Roswell crash site had 6 toes and 6 fingers. Even the aircraft broken pieces, which they recovered, had handprints for 6 fingers, which they believe this alien used to fly the aircraft with. And in the Bible, the fallen angels that came down and made it with mankind, their offspring would have 6 fingers and 6 toes, just like Goliath. And a lot of times in different areas in like New Mexico and Arizona and places over there, a lot of the people of that land will see rocks with 6 fingers handprinted into the rock, and they don't know who's walking around with these 6 fingers. But we know that the Philistines, David and Goliath was 9 feet tall. The Nephilim, people, the giants of the earth in old days, which they might talk about in Bible class, they were tall and they had 6 fingers and 6 toes. This is in the book of Genesis, Chronicles, and Amos. Back then, the Philistines occupied the land which is now Palestine, but they weren't completely destroyed. The Nephilim continued to live on in the cities of Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Gaza, which is in Israel/Palestine. They never were fully eradicated at that time. All right, so today, Palestine only occupies the Gaza, city of Gaza. I mean, that's the most famous part that they occupy. And so when a Palestinian tells you that he is descendants of the Philistines, a lot of them will tell you that they are partly incorrect, that they inhabit the land that the Philistines used to live in, but they are not descendants of the Philistines. Why? Because the Philistines were children of the Egyptians, descendants of the Egyptians by way of Casluhim and Capthorum, as evident in numerous scriptures in the Bible. And they were descendants of Mizraim, and this is also admitted in the book of Genesis. And Mizraim was the ancient word, or the word for Egypt. That's where the Egyptians came from. Now, so we would expect the Philistines today to, thus look like the way they looked back then, with woolly hair and black skin, like the ancient Egyptians, who were their cousins. But the current day Palestinians don't look like that. They're obviously not black with woolly hair, because the Arabs in Palestine are not indigenous to the land. If you go back thousands of years, in the before Christ era, we all know that the Arab empire or the Islamic movement didn't conquer and take over the Middle East and Mesopotamia and North Africa until a little over 600 AD, after the Prophet Muhammad died. And this can be easily researched. You can look for yourself. Back then, in the before Christ era, the Arabs did not control North Africa, the Middle East, and Mesopotamia. So in regards to the Nephilim, the Bible talks about the sons of God, and the sons of God were the fallen angels that mated with human women to produce a race of giants, and the hybrid of the angels and the women of the earth, and their seed was called the Nephilim, and they were men of renown, which could be good or bad depending on one's goals and motivations. And the majority of references in the Bible cast their intentions in a negative light and warns of these beings. In fact, in Genesis, it implies that the Nephilim had a strong hand in the evil that was in the world and were a major reason for the great flood occurring with Noah. And so a lot of people will say the sons of God, angels, can't mate with women since they're spiritual beings, that they're fallen angels. But if they were in the physical, they should have been able to mate with a woman. Now, the Hebrew word Nephilim carries a sense of the word fallen, just like how the angels fell from the second estate from heaven. Now, what kind of beings would be seen as sons of God, yet not represent the kingdom of heaven? Now, the ancient Israelites perceived them as superior. One logical explanation is that they were alien travelers from another world whose superior technology made them appear as gods to the ancients, the same way the ancient Sumerians called the Anunnaki the star gods, and that the star gods created them and taught them all the things that they learned. It's basically stemming off the same thing that happened with the fallen angels and the people of the earth in the book of Enoch. Now, this perception, like I said, is supported by many ancient cultures, including one of the oldest known civilization cultures, the Sumerians. And their cuneiform texts speak specifically of beings that came from the sky to the earth, and they talk about the constellation Orion, as do the same for the Egyptians and the pyramids of Giza that point to the Orion constellation. The ancient Egyptian religion, Osiris and Horus, also came from the Orion constellation, with the mother Isis coming from the dog star Sirius. Now, the ancients, like I said, perceived these fallen angels or alien space travelers to be gods, and they worshiped them, just like the way the Canaanites worship Baal and Asheroth, and the Anunnaki gods named Anu, and Inanna, which was another word for Ishtar, and Hathor. And they believe that the ancestors came from the planet Nibiru, as recorded by the Sumerians. A lot of times you will see the planet Nibiru thrown up in movies like the new Star Trek movie. It begins with Captain Kirk on planet Nibiru running from the people of the planet that's on that planet. And of course, when they leave in the Starship Enterprise from being at the bottom of the ocean, they view them as gods. And so years later, they're worshiping the Starship Enterprise because they are people that came from the skies and left back to the skies. So the Nephilim had different names. Emim was one of the names was because anyone that saw them were seized with terror. And we also have the name Rephaim, which was the name was based off the fact that because when people looked at them, they were soft like wax. And the Zamzumins, and this is because they inspired fear and were fierce warriors. And the Gibborim, which was because their brains measured greater than 40 feet. The Avim, because they destroyed the world. Of course, we have the word Nephilim, because they caused the world to fall after falling themselves from heaven, meaning the fallen angels. And also the Anakim, because they were the sons of Anak, which is in the Bible, which was a descendant of Heth, who was a descendant of Canaan, the Canaanites. And the sons of Anak were giants / fallen angels, similar to the Anunnaki. Notice how the word Anakim is similar to the word Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki considered the star people, the people that came from heaven and came down and created them and taught them all the different things they learned. Now, the Bible, like we saw earlier with the alien with the 6 fingers and the 6 toes, the autopsy in 1948, same year that they created the state of Israel, in the same year that they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, Israel, in the caves. Interesting. And 2 Samuel talks about, and there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, and where Elhanan, the son of Jer-Oregim, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was live a weaver's beam. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature that had on every hand 6 fingers, on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant. Again in Samuel 1:17-4, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now I'm going to show the resemblance of the six fingers and the six toes. The ancient Sumerians, here is a picture of ancient Sumerians, how they worship the Anunnaki. They have here the sun in the middle of the solar system, but they don't have the typical 9 planets that we have. They have more planets. One of the planets is supposed to be where these star gods that came from. Now, there's a lot of pictures on the internet that people can, I guess, look up and see when they type in Nephilim or giants. And whether or not these pictures are photoshopped or not, whether it's real or not, I don't understand why people would, make these pictures to appear the way they do, if it wasn't for some monetary gain. But nevertheless, here we see a picture of a skeleton that obviously is a giant, way bigger than NBA players that are 7 feet tall. Of course, in the Bible, it says in Numbers 13, 27, 29, about the Nephilim, and they, the Israelites, told him, Moses, we're talking about, and said, we came unto the land whither thou sent us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in that land, and the cities are walled and very great, and moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. Now, these were all descendants of the Canaanites, the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Hittites. You can look this up in the Bible. So this proves that the children of Canaan dwelt among the seed of the Nephilim, and they also had the Nephilim seed in them, and they dwelt among the sons of Anak, which were also descendants of the Canaanites. So the Canaanite seed bloodline had traces of the Nephilim seed in them, the bloodline. And we all know that the Canaanites also intermarried and gave their sons and daughters away to the Israelites. And the Israelites did the same with the Canaanites, and they did this for thousands of years. So we also know that by this account that we would expect the Nephilim bloodline also to be in the children of Israel's bloodline, the 12 tribes of Israel. So in the book of Enoch, again, which is not in our Bible, it says here, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go unto them and to defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms, talking about mankind, and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they, the fallen angels and the Nephilim, began to sin, meaning have sex against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless one. So in this verse, it talks about the Nephilim, how they're teaching mankind all types of things, and they began to sin, which means have sex against birds, beasts, and reptiles and fish. Now, could this be the reason why we have dinosaurs and large fish and large animals and large birds in the past? And that's what a lot of people think. And they also practice cannibalism and drinking the blood, which a lot of cult satanic practices do, because they believe that all life is in the blood. And that's actually a scripture in the Bible where it talks about the life of all flesh is in the blood. So when they drink the blood, it's like they're drinking the life form or life source of that person. Now the Anakites were descendants of the 3 sons of Anak. Anak was a descendant of Heth. The people that were also associated with the Nephilim were the Canaanites, the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Emites, the Horites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Girgashites, the Jezreelites, the Macathites, the Philistines, and the kingdom of Og. So here we have again in the book of, we talked about the book of Enoch, and now in the book of Yashar, which is a Hebrew book. The Ethiopians know this book well as the Jews, and it talks about here in the book of Joshua 4:18-9, and the sons of men in those days They took from the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and they taught the mixture of animals of one species with another in order to provoke the Lord. And they corrupted the earth, and God saw that the whole earth was corrupt, and flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. Now this is going on to this day. Mankind is trying to intermix different species of animals as well as animal DNA and human DNA. The Nephilim back then in those days were doing this, and they were teaching man to do this, which was an abomination and went against God's natural order of things. We also know that the sons of Anak were giants. The Israelites saw them as to themselves they were so big that they said that they were like grasshoppers in their sights. And again, like we said in Joshua 11:2, that supposedly there were none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. However, they were only in Gaza and Gath and Ashdod, and they remained there. This is in Palestine, southern Israel, and it never talks about them being fully eradicated. So their bloodline really never ends according to the Bible. And so the book of Enoch also talks about these giants, book 15 verse 8 through 12, and it says, "And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. The evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies, because they are born from men and from the holy watchers." Fallen angels were also known as watchers. The watchers used to watch the earth. So it says, "Is their beginning and primal origin, and they shall be evil spirits on the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. And the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise upon against the children of men, against women, because they are proceeded from them." So, and we talked about the Anakim before in Rephaim. Here is their connection to the Canaanites, which would also connect them to the children of Israel per the scriptures. So the descendants of Anak mean long-necked giant, and Anak was the son of Arba. And Arba in Hebrew means strength of Baal. Baal is a pagan god. So in Joshua 15:13 it says, "Unto Caleb the son of Jephunneh he gave a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, even the city of Arba, the father of Anak, which city is Hebron, or Hebron. And Caleb drove thence the three sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. So Arba was one of the sons of Heth, who built the city of Hebron, called Kirjath Arba, meaning the city of Arba, book of Genesis 23. And if you look here, Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried in the land of Heth. Heth was the son of Canaan, in the city of Hebron, Genesis 25:10, where it says, "The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife." And here we have in Genesis 10:15, if you don't believe, it says, "And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn in Heth." Now, Sidon is a city in Lebanon, and so this is along the lines where they dwelt that, along that coast, the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, there are all the scriptures you can look at right there in Deuteronomy, Joshua. So the children of Israel intermixed for generations with the same Canaanites that were infected with the Nephilim blood. Then how could anybody back then even know or distinguish a pure Hebrew Israelite from a Canaanite? And how could they not know that they were also infected with the Canaanite seed? How could you tell? Because the Canaanites had the Nephilim seed in them, as we could see in different biblical scriptures, and the Israelites intermarried and intermixed and had children with the Canaanites. So you really can't, tell who was infected and who wasn't infected, but we do know that they most likely also had some of this bloodline passed through their seed. Now, what about the six-finger trait with the giants that the Nephilim commonly had? Most of the giants had 6 fingers, 6 toes. So, who has a common occurrence of 6 fingers now? I'm gonna take a look and see. And this is going to really shock people when they figure out the correlation. So in the Bible, before we get into about the six fingers, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the Bible that the Nephilim bloodline intermarried or intermixed with the Canaanites, who then in turn mixed their bloodline with the children of Israel's bloodline. So if you read in Judges chapter 3, verse 5 through 6, and it says the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and they took their daughters to be their wives, and they gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. So this is basically saying that they had a union, and they had kids. The Israelites had kids with the Canaanites. So again, in Ezra 9, verse 1 through 2, it says, "Now when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites," which is the descendants of Heth, which was the forefathers of Anak or the Anakim. And here we have the Perizzites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Moabites. Moabites was the descendants of Lot, Abraham's brother. And the Egyptians, and a lot of times the Egyptians, they also had elongated, skulls, and they were said to be infected with the Nephilim bloodline as well. And the Amorites, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed, notice here it says holy seed, have mingled themselves with the people of the land. So the holy seed, meaning the children of Israel, intermixed their seed and had kids with these people, with the Egyptians, the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Anakim, and everybody else that was infected with the Canaanite bloodline. So interestingly enough, let's say that the children of Israel, they were black back in those days, and the Canaanites were black in those days too, because they were descendants of Ham. Canaan was descendants of Ham. Ethiopians were too, and the Egyptians were. They all intermixed with the children of Israel. They were black as well. So, interesting enough, polydactyl, which is the medical terminology for one having 6 fingers and 6 toes, polydactyl occurs 10 times more often in Negroid ethnicities in African populations than any other race in the world. So, it is a known fact that 1 in 143 live births born to Africans or African Americans or black people in general have polydactyl, which a lot of times you have this extra digit on your hand. So you have 6 fingers. One of the fingers may be fully grown or may be partially grown or a little stub, compared to 1 in 1,339 births in Caucasians. So if the angels, good or bad, in human form had 6 fingers and 6 toes to begin with, which we don't know, but we see this account in the Bible, then we would expect that this trait be passed on to humans if they created an unholy union with women. Now remember, in the Bible, a lot of times the angels would appear as actual human beings, and they would come into people's house, they would eat dinner with them, they would spend the night, they would wrestle. The angels wrestled with Jacob, and then his name got changed to Israel, and the angels came down and made it with the daughters of men. And so they had 6 fingers and 6 toes, at least their offspring did. And so here we see that the majority of people of African descent or black people have a higher incidence of polydactyl than any other race in the world. So if the Watchers passed this polydactyl trait to the certain nations of the people back then, including the children of Israel, who then in turn mated with the Canaanites, then we would expect this to be. We expect that the people of black descent would have a genetic connection to the ancient Hebrew Israelites by way of the Nephilim, Canaanite, Egyptian, Israelite connection. Here we have some true, actual testimonies of people that were born with 6 fingers. And if you ask a lot of people, black people today, a lot of them will tell you that their auntie or their grandmother or mother was born with 6 fingers, and of course a lot of times they remove it, and so you just see a stub on the side of the hand. So this person right here says that I was born with 6 fingers, 2 on each hand. I am an African, and this phenomena is quite widespread. In ancient times, a child who was born with such defects was raised to be a king from the early stages. Even today, the theory is that those born with 6 fingers are bound to be successful in life, and I bear testimony to that. I have also witnessed several folks who are also successful. Here goes another actual account. A couple years ago, I was talking to an elderly lady who was taken to see some Aboriginal rock art in North Queensland, Australia, by a well-known explorer of such things. One painting she was shown in a hidden location was a huge ancestral figure painted on a cliff face. It had 6 fingers on each hand. When she returned to her home base at the time of Kuranda in Australia on the Atherton Tablelands, she went to the local hotel, and an Aboriginal black man came up to her and insisted on shaking her hand. His hand had 6 fingers. Now, another one. Now, this is another story right here. It says that the statues that they find are made to symbolize that these giants of old are sons of angels. Now, as you have obviously shown, they were known to every culture across the world. The term Nephilim, translated into Greek, means Titan, whom were also giants, and whom were also the sons of gods. They were like demigods. Now, these men were also said to have 6 fingers. There is even a story in William Cody's autobiography about an encounter with the Pawnee Indians that reads this as follows. So, right here it says the story. It says, while we were in the Sand Hills, scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said that the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. This is in, I guess, America. They said that these people were 3 times the size of man of the present day, and that they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal on one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. They too had 6 fingers on their hands, which was why the Indians raised their hands when they greeted someone, so that they could count the fingers, for they feared the 6-fingered men. And here we see pictures of people, obviously not Caucasian, of color, with six fingers. Some of them also having 6 toes. Here we see some more pictures of skeletons that archaeologists have dug up with human being skulls the size of a person, or actually bigger than a person, and skeletons that are like 30 feet plus. Now remember in Amos 2:9 it says, he says, yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks, yet I was destroyed from his fruit from above and his roots beneath. Now this guy right here, this picture, he's standing next to a 47-inch femur. Now, when you do the calculations, this was in the late 1950s that during the road construction in Turkey, in the Euphrates Valley, that they found many tombs containing the remains of giants that were uncovered. And at this site, they found some leg bones. One of the leg bones was about 47 inches long. This is a femur bone. And they said that based on, doing the proportions of humans with the thigh bone and leg and their tibia, fibia, and pelvis and their torso, that the giant would have stood at least 16 feet tall minimum. And this is pretty tall. And in the book of Deuteronomy 3:11 states that the king Og of Bashan was 9 cubits and 4 cubits, or approximately 14 feet tall. That's pretty big. That's twice the size of Shaq. Imagine seeing somebody on the basketball court twice the size of Shaq. Now here are the cedar trees of Lebanon. Back in those days, the Nephilim dwelt and lived amongst Lebanon, and these cedar trees in Lebanon, as the ancient Israelites compared the giants to, are pretty tall. As you can see, this person right here next to the cedar tree. Now the book of Enoch also talks about what these Nephilim taught man. one of the angels, Azazel, which was interesting enough, one of the names that they used in the movie Fallen with Denzel Washington. Azazel is one of the spirits that was entering and jumping in and out of people, and eventually got into Denzel Washington. But this angel Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and also taught them how to make bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and the coloring of tinctures. And they were and there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and they became corrupt in all their ways. This is talking about the people of the world. And Semjaza, another angel, taught enchantments and root cuttings. And then Amaras, another angel, taught the resolving of enchantments. And here we see more angels taught astrology and taught about the constellations and the knowledge of the clouds, and the signs of the earth, and the signs of the sun, and the signs of the moon. Now these angels, there's a lot of angels, and they taught mankind a lot of different things. The blows of death. They taught them how to make weapons and shields. They taught them how to secrets like wisdom, and they taught them how to write with ink and paper, and they taught them how to smite the embryo in the womb and cause an abortion. These are all things that the ancient fallen angels taught mankind. And remember, I was saying how they intermixed with the animals back then. In those days, the animals in the Book of Jubilees could talk, just like in Numbers 22:28, where the donkey kept getting beat. And then finally the donkey said, "What have I done unto thee that thou hast smitten me with these three times?" And so in the Book of Jubilees, it says that in chapter 3, verse 23, it says, on that day was closed the mouth of all beasts and of cattle and of birds and whatever walks and whatever moves, so that they can no longer speak. For the animals, they had all spoken one with another with one lip and with one tongue. So here we see some more pictures. We're going to move forward with different heights of the Nephilim, going all the way to 36 feet. Here we see a man right here standing next to a rock with a huge foot imprinted in the stone, and the foot is almost the size of himself. He may be about between 5, 6, maybe 6 feet, but it's hard to tell. But anyway, here we have these are actual skeletons that were found throughout time. And in 650 BC, they found a 36-foot skeleton in North Africa. An earthquake helped uncover one of these skeletons. And then in 1613 AD in France, they found a almost complete skeleton of a human being, and it was 25 feet long. In France in 1456 AD, they found a skeleton 23 feet long. And here we see different skeletons: 19 feet, 20 feet, 12 feet. Goliath was almost 11 feet, 9 to 11 feet. Some more pictures. The ancient Egyptians, a lot of times they drew pictures on the wall, and a lot of times they were huge compared to these other people that were sitting on their laps. Now, whether or not they're kids or they're real people, and these people are giants, that's something that's kind of interesting. And then we talk about how the pyramids were built. Some people say they were built with help with the Nephilim and the giants that lived in those days. You see more pictures in Egypt of huge skeletons. And we have the elongated skulls. The elongated skulls that archaeologists have found all over the world. Nefertiti of Egypt, they say that she had an elongated skull. When you look at her ancient statues, and the elongated skulls, a lot of times they were associated with red hair in some places of the world, and they failed to have a sagittal suture. Now, they only had 2 suture lines that divided their skull into 3 sections: the front, the middle, and the back. Normally, that's not the case with all human beings. All human beings have a sagittal suture, as you can see right here on the diagram. And these elongated skulls that they found all over the world, especially in Egypt and other places like South America, they didn't have the sagittal suture right here. It was completely gone. and that's not something that's consistent with mankind, with human beings. And perhaps this is because the human beings at this time that had these elongated skulls had their DNA mixed or manipulated or altered, and that's why their heads were elongated. They were giants, and they didn't have the sagittal suture. So we're going to move forward, and we're going to quickly talk about Baal worship today that's going on in churches, Christian church, Catholic church, the media. Back then, throughout the Bible, the Israelites worship false gods, and one in particular, Baal, or they call him Balaam. And the word Baal can be linked to a lot of different names of gods, but for the most part, Baal and his wife Ashtaroth is commonly known. It's in the Bible, if you do the research. And Ashtaroth was the Phoenician goddess of love. Goddess of love was worshipped by many names, such as Semiramis, who became known to the Babylonians as Ishtar. Ishtar, you see alongside with Baal when you look at and you do your research. So in Judges, it talks about, the Bible talks about, how Baal, Israelites serve Baal and they serve Ashtaroth. And so once I realized who Ashtaroth really was, I discovered that Baal was her husband. And then you realize that the names were, in actuality, Nimrod and his wife, mother. A lot of times the wife was also the mother, just like in the Egyptian religion. And so they had different names, like Nimrod and his wife / mother, Semiramis. And so it was then I came to realize that Israel was not worshiping a whole host of false gods, but they were actually only worshiping one, and the names were just changed. And a lot of times they talked about the reincarnated Nimrod, and then Nimrod was also called the sun god Marduk, which was also synonymous with Baal under that name, and he was also known as Horus. And so when I talked about, when you talk about the reincarnated Nimrod, he was also worshipped or mentioned in the Bible as Tammuz, and this is in Ezekiel 8:14, and Israel worshipped him under that name. And so there are many names that Nimrod, reincarnated Nimrod, used to correspond with the name of his wife / mother, names such as Mars and Venus or Isis and Osiris. Nimrod's wife was known to the Ephesians by the name of Diana. Nimrod was also known as Orion. All these different names can obscure the truth if we're not careful, but the fact is, regardless of the name, the personage of these false gods goes back to the fall of the Tower of Babel and the king that ruled during that time, Nimrod. And when we get down to the root of all these pagan names, as they change from one name to another, but they mean the same, the mastermind behind all of these pagan gods and worship is Satan. Satan wanted the Israelites and the nations in those days to worship him as the Most High. And even today, he does not want us to worship him, so he continues to throw Baal worship into every aspect of our life today. Now, Nimrod was an important figure back then because it was he that started all the wickedness that spread from Babel throughout all the world. And back in those days, the people were of one mind and one speech and under one king, and they became perverted and offended by God. They offended God by building the tower. So God separated the people and confused their languages, and the different groups drifted away and became different people. And many of the groups that were separated continued to worship Nimrod or reincarnated Nimrod as a god, and as time passed, they used other names and images to portray him and his wife / mother. The groups that continued to worship him are known by the fact that God, instructed Israel to destroy them and destroy these pagan gods and symbols of idolatry. And these people were the Israelites and the Jebusites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Hittites. And Egypt also was involved in this type of pagan worship. And they used different names, and over time names have changed. Israel, and in the beginning, as we all know, they learned the worship of these false gods while in Egypt, And even when they crossed over the Red Sea, they were still reverting back to worshiping these old pagan gods, even though they spent 400 years in Egypt. And as we know that after the death of, going back when they first got into Egypt, when the death of Joseph and the forefathers of the people of Israel integrated themselves into Egyptian society and became prosperous. And of course, during that time, they worshiped the same gods that the Egyptians had, and they forgot about the God of Jacob, Joseph, and the forefathers that which we know in the Bible. So, they weren't allowed to bring these false gods out with them. Like I said, they still did it, and even Aaron, Moses' brother, he crafted up a golden calf, and the Israelites were worshiping that, worshiping Baal, and he never abandoned the worship of false gods in their hearts for thousands of years. And this is one of the reasons why the Israelites were going through what they went through in different forms of captivity and persecution, as the curses of Israel talked about. And they still were worshiping the pagan gods, and they still were intermarrying with the Canaanites, and also violating a lot of the other commandments that God had given them. Today's time, we still see this worship of Nimrod and all the different pagan gods. So one sign of this continued worship of Nimrod or Baal is found in Israel. It's found in their celebration of their Jubilee. As we all know, Israel became a nation in 1948, and they celebrated their 50th anniversary or Jubilee in 1998. Now, to commemorate this occasion, Israel produced a limited edition gold coin depicting, of all things, the Tower of Babel. There was only about 888 of these coins minted, and afterwards another coin was minted for widespread distribution. But there is a special coin made with the Tower of Babel imprinted on it. Now the question is, why would the Tower of Babel be on an Israeli coin when Israel did not even exist during the time of the Tower of Babel and Babel the Great? And we all know the Tower of Babel was associated with a lot of negative things, as well as Babylon. The reason is that somewhere inside Israel there are those in power that recognize what they have been doing over the years, and that they are in agreement with continuing to do it. So, in a sense, this is kind of glorifying the Tower of Babel. You would think that if you're going to have a 50-year commemorative coin, you would have, the tablets of the Ten Commandments, or the Ark of the Covenant, or the Well of Jacob, or some other important event in Israel's history in the Bible, but it's not. It's the Tower of Babel, which was initially a kingdom of Nimrod, who was the husband of Semiramis, reincarnated husband of Semiramis, who was the goddess of love. And Ashtaroth was also the goddess of love, and Baal was her husband, if you continue to see the name change. So in 1998, we see Israel was still worshiping Baal. Still to this day, we still see evidence of Baal worship in Israel with the obelisk, the stone structure that sits in Washington D.C. is considered an obelisk. And you see it also in the Israeli Supreme Court, the Vatican, Egypt, and London City. You see it in New York and Brazil. In ancient times, this monument represented Baal worship, or Baal shaft, which is Baal's penis, and they were also called groves or Asherah in the Bible, which you also see today if you read your King James Bible. And here we see the picture of the special edition coin, Israel. This is actually in 2002, the picture of the Tower of Babel on a gold minted coin. And an obelisk in the Bible, like I talked about, is called Asherah. In Hebrew, the King James Version Bible uses the word groves. This word always refers to idol worship, and as you can see here in 2 Chronicles 34, 3-4, it says that in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places, and the groves, meaning Asherah, and the carved images and the molten images, and they break down the altars of Baalim in his presence, and the images that were on the high above them, and he cut down and the groves and the carved images and the molten images he broke in pieces and made dust of them and strode upon the graves of them that had sacrificed unto them. And here we see again in 2 Chronicles 34:7, it says, and when he had broken down the altars and the groves, or Asherah in parentheses, and he had beaten the graven images into powder and cut down all the idols throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. So this basically tells you that back in those days in these books of the Bible, that the prophets of Baal, they erected these groves. And the groves are what we see today called obelisk. We see it in America as Washington, D.C., as you can see right here, and then we see it in Egypt. It originated out of Egypt, as you can see here. Next to looks like a Sphinx character, and as you can see here in London City, and you see all over the world, you see this monumental structure, which is known back in those days as Baal Shaft, or was a place where the spirit of Horus dwelled, because it came from Egypt. And of course, over time, things change. Things mean different things. They take on different names, like I was talking about earlier. And here we see a picture of Ishtar. Ishtar was also associated with Baal, being a wife of Baal, and we see two owls right here. Ishtar's symbol was associated with the 8 pointed star. And the 8 pointed star is seen in the British flag. Ancient Sumerians, they also had the 8 pointed star. Freemasons also use this 8 pointed star. And this was all associated with Ishtar. Here we see Baal worship with the bull, how the Israelites worship children and infants to the bull of Baal. And here we see ancient pictures of Ishtar worship. And then you see in the middle, you see the 4 star with the circle in it, and that's the symbol of Baal. In the Vatican, here helicopter view at St. Peter's Square, you see the symbol of Ishtar, the 8-point star. Here we see 8 points right here in the middle. You also see the 4-pointed star inside the circle, which is also correlates with the symbol of Baal. And as you see here, aerial point of view, you can see that the St. Peter's Square, you see the upside down cross right there. And we see here in the Vatican the phallic symbol of Baal, the obelisk. Back then, in those days, the Egyptians worshipped the sun god. This was the dwelling place of the sun god, or Amun-Ra, or Horus. Or Horus reincarnated, or after he died and was resurrected, he became known as Ra. So the Egyptian obelisk is very old. Originally carved during the reign of Pharaoh Tutmosis III, it stood in the temple of Ammon in Thebes, which is Karnak, but was removed to Rome by Emperor Constantius in 317 AD and placed in the Circus Maximus. And in 1587, Pope Sixtus V unearthed the fallen, broken, and long forgotten obelisk and had it repaired and placed in the Piazza S. Giovanni in Laterano. And interesting enough, it is possible that Moses saw this same very obelisk when he was in Egypt. Now, this obelisk meant to honor the sun god, Ra, who was Horus, and it stands beside what Catholics call the Supreme Mother of all churches, the official cathedral of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, in St. Peter's Square, which brings to mind Revelation 17:5, in the apostate Mother Church Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, who stands accused of fornication and the mixing of sacred with the profane, truth and error. Here we see everybody visiting St. Peter's Square. You got this big old obelisk right here in the center, and people do not know what it really means and why it's there and who brought it there. The Pope himself, having wearing things in his clothes that have symbols similar to the symbol of Ishtar and Baal. Now, this symbol right here is an ancient symbol of Baal found on a rock in the Canaanite city of Hazor in northern Israel. And when we talk about the Pope, we see also the mitre, the hat, similar to Dagon. We see the twisted bent cross mocking, which was used by occult societies back then to mock Jesus Christ. So the Pope's silver scepter in the picture before was it's a satanic crucifix that the Pope was made and carrying for a long time. Now, this twisted crucifix symbol has been the symbol of the final Antichrist since black magic Satanists created it in 666 AD. This was written in a book by Roman Catholic author Piers Compton. The book was called The Broken Cross, Hidden Hand of the Vatican. And it talks about this twisted crucifix staff cross that the Pope carries. And this bent crucifix is a sinister symbol used by Satanists in the 6th century that had been revived at the time of the Vatican. And it was a bent or broken cross on which was displayed a repulsive and distorted figure of Christ, which the black magicians and sorcerers of the Middle Ages had made use of to make mockery of Jesus and represent the biblical term mark of the beast. Yet not only Paul VI, but his successors, the 2 John Pauls, carried the same staff with the bent crucifix and held it up to be revered by the crowds, who had not the slightest idea that it stood for the Antichrist. Here you see the picture right here of the bent cross, supposedly used by Satanists and invented by Satanists in 666 AD. Here we see the Pope in his mitre hat, and which is which comes out of Babylon, the ancient hat of the priest of Dagon. Also, is the same hat that the Pope wears to this day. And as you can see, the Pope's hat looks like a fish's mouth opening. And here we see some more pictures how the priests of Dagon, back in those days, how they wore their hats. And it's similar, if not the same, as the mitre that the Pope wears today, as you can see here in these pictures. And a little bit about Dagon. Dagon was a little fish, a fish god, that the national god of the Philistines. That was the national god of the Philistines, and they worshiped this god in Judges 16:23. You can look this up. Now the idol had a body of a fish and the head and hands of a man, and it was an Assyrian Babylonian deity, more Babylonian origin. And when you look at the picture, you'll see various representations of the way in which the Dagon hat or mitre was worn. He wore it different ways, but the majority of the ways he wore it was similar to what the Pope wears. And he also carried his holy water, which he sprinkled in one hand while holding a container of water in the other hand, kind of similar to what the Pope does to this day. And in this picture we saw earlier, here you see the 2 Dagon priests sprinkling holy water while looking up towards an Egyptian symbol of sun worship. Judges 16:23 is famous for talking about Samson, and here it says, "And the Lord of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand." So this is kind of fishy that the fish guy with this fish-looking hat is the same as what the Pope wears to this day. And the symbol of the church and the Catholic Church is a fish. And we all know the story in Samuel 6, verse 1 through 7, where it talks about the statue of Dagon. The Philistines had at one point acquired the Ark of the Covenant, but when they had the Ark of the Covenant, a lot of stuff started happening, and they had the statue of Dagon set in a certain area, and then when he woke up the next day, Dagon statue had fallen on his face on the ground before the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Lord, and the statue of the Dagon, his head and both the palms of his hand were cut off, lying on the floor. And the only thing that was left was the trunk of the statue of Dagon. And the priests of Dagon couldn't believe what had happened, and they felt this was a sign. And they also, at that time, all these mice started showing up, and the mice was running around, and the people of the Philistines started having tumors and boils in Ashdod, which is the territory where Palestine is at, and its territories. And so when people of the Philistines saw this, and all the stuff that was going on with them with tumors and boils, and the Dagon statue was cut up into different pieces, and they don't know who did it, they saw that the God of the Israelites was more powerful than their pagan God. And they said they didn't want the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Lord anymore. So moving forward with the Pope, as you see here, Pope Benedictine has this little picture of a man that looks like he has horns, almost like Satan, on his outfit. And a lot of people don't know that Pope Benedict was a member of the Nazi Party as a youth. Because right here is his swastika on his little badge over his right pocket. A lot of people don't know that his relationship with the Nazis. And like we showed before, the symbolism is the same with the upside down cross and the upside down cross in Satan practices. Remember, in the Bible, this is kind of weird that I wanted to show, is that we all know the sign of Satan, and then we remember in the verse where Jesus turns and says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Peter, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." So the cross that the Pope sits under, the upside down cross, because they say that Peter was crucified upside down, is it the cross of St. Peter, or is it the cross of Satan? Or is it the cross of the Heavenly Father? Because we all know that the upside down cross nowadays is associated with negative connotations or evil. So the same symbols we see here on the Pope, on his collar, you can see here, is also used in ancient Egypt. Right here on top of the bull with the sun. When the Pope resigned mysteriously, lightning struck the basilica, the church, twice, right at the top on, I think, the left side of the cross. Normally lightning doesn't strike twice. Here we see back in those days, Horus in the Egyptian worship, they carried their kings and their gods the same way they carried the Pope. And they also had this little feathered thing that they are holding behind him that is the same as what the Pope uses. And again, they're carrying the Pope in the same fashion that they carried Horus and the kings of Egypt. And they also walk behind him with this little feathered type of apparatus rod. You can see here, it's better view. And of course, the Pope appears benevolent, and people are kissing his hand. He's kissing people's hands. He's washing feet. He's kissing feet, all to appear to be like Jesus Christ. When in reality, the meaning of the word vicarious filii Dei means substitute for the Son of God. So the Pope is essentially the Son of God on earth. And in Revelation 13:18, it says that let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. Now I found this very interesting. I don't know whether it's true or not. A lot of people can do their own research for themselves, but supposedly every word has a numerical value in the Latin alphabet, same as Greek and Hebrew, and during the Roman kingdom. And if you add up the numerical value of the word that the Pope wears on his hat, if you add it up, you will get 666. If you add up the numerical value for vicarious, numerical value for filii and Dei, it all adds up to 666. You do the same thing in Greek, it adds up to 666. You do the same thing in Hebron during the Roman kingdom, it adds up to 666. Now, a guy wrote a book about this called his name is Joseph F. Berg, in his book The Great Apostasy, and he said that we challenge the world to find another name which in these languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, all add up to the same number, 666. It's very strange. And if people really pay attention, the Pope a lot of times sits between two cherubims, which are angels. And in the Bible, it says that, the Antichrist, the son of perdition, will deceive mankind. And he will exalt himself as God, and he will sit on the throne as he of God. We see here in Isaiah 37:16, O Lord God of hosts, God of Israel, that dwelleth between the cherubims. So the God of Israel is supposed to dwell between these two cherubims, which are angels. Thou art the God, even though thou alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou have made heaven and earth. Now in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, it says, Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Here we see, if you take a look, the Pope sits between two cherubim on the throne, same way that God sits on the throne. God is going to sit on the throne. Now this, we're just going to keep it going with the Catholic Church and their associate people that they associate with. And here we see here this pyramid graph, we see that at the bottom of the pyramid, that's where we are, and then a little bit above that, you see the government, educational system, police, NATO troops. Above that, the politicians, secret intelligence agencies like the CIA, and you have above that, you have secret societies, Freemasons and Skull and Bones, Jesuits, B'nai B'rith, Knights of Malta, Illuminati, Bilderberg, all types of different names. And then you have the bankers, the big bankers that control everything, royalty and aristocracy, like of the family in London, England, the royal family. And then, of course, at the top you see the Jesuits have a lot of power, and the rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, have a lot of power. And then you have the all-seeing eye at the top. What God is that? And talk about the Jesuits. Right now, we have the first black pope, or the first Jesuit pope. Pope Francis is the first black pope in papal history. And if you really do your research about that, that's a big thing. And a lot of people probably didn't pay attention when he became elected pope, that we got a Jesuit pope. So we see some pictures here. The Pope, the Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits were also cool with the Nazis. Germany at one point became second front for the Jesuits, and they built the Third Reich. And they came up with the swastika, the Nazis, which we talked about earlier, was an old symbol that was something that they didn't create. Now, all of Hitler and his associates were Roman Catholics, and they were all cool with the Jesuits. Some of them say that a lot of the Nazis even had Jewish blood in their veins. Here we see a Catholic priest giving a Hitler salute at a Catholic youth rally in 1933. Here we see Hitler right here giving his salute. In the background, you see the pyramid with the all-seeing eye in the building structure, and we see the people in front with different symbolisms, like the Knights of Malta. This is a church in the daytime, the same church that Hitler was in front of. And Hitler himself said that I have learned most of all from the Jesuit order. So far, there has been nothing more imposing on the earth than the hierarchical organization of the Catholic Church. And a good part of that organization, Hitler says, I have transported direct to my own party. The Catholic Church must be held up as an example. I will tell you a secret. I am founding an order in Himmler, and Himmler would later become the head of the Nazi Party. I see our Ignatius de Loyola, which was the founder of the Jesuits. And Adolf Hitler also quote, above all I have learned from the Jesuits, and so did Lenin too, as far as I recall. The world has never known anything quite so splendid as the hierarchical structure of the Roman Catholic Church. There were quite a few things I simply appropriated from the Jesuits for the use of the Nazi Party. This is what Hitler said himself. And here we see Hitler's relationship with the Catholic Church, the Knights of Malta symbol, and the Jesuits. And here we see Nelson Mandela is a member of the Knights of Malta. As you can see with his robe and symbolism, along with this man right here, he's obviously a member of the Knights of Malta. And Sammy Davis Jr. was a member of the Knights of Malta. Here we see a picture of him with his Knights of Malta outfit on. And here we see a closer picture of the Knights of Malta emblem with the swastika in the middle, because they were all members of this organization.